What's up guys, my name is Ace, and in today's video we're going to be comparing the M4A1 with the Fara 83 in Warzone. And the primary reason behind this is these guns are actually very similar. They have an identical fire rate, relatively similar damage and range profiles, and they're both quite accurate weapons that excel toward the longer ranges. So in today's video, I wanted to put them side by side, break down all of their important stats to see which one is better. And I'll be right up front with you guys, this is of course going to be the Fara 83. I think most people already know that, but mainly what I wanted to point out in this video is how much of a discrepancy there is between the M4A1 and the Fara 83. And diving right into the comparison, let's start off with damage. Our base damage with the M4A1 is 28, whereas with the Fara 83 it's 31. And it's worth noting that with both of these assault rifles, that damage applies anywhere in the body, whereas a lot of other assault rifles require those upper torso shots to get your maximum damage, but not with these guns. As for our headshot damage, the M4A1 has a better multiplier, so we get a 42 damage, whereas the Fara 83, the multiplier isn't quite as good, but since the base damage is higher, we do get basically exactly the same headshot damage. It's 41 instead of 42. And now let's move on to our ranges, but before we do this, I just wanted to point out that for this comparison, I'm comparing the most common setups and also the most comparable setups between these two for a long-range build. So with the M4A1, these are the attachments that I tested with, and then you can see with the Fara 83, it's the exact same counterpart. It's all of the same sort of attachments, but on the Fara 83. And when using these attachments, our range value on the M4A1 is 44 meters, whereas the Fara 83 isn't quite as good, but it is very similar at 40 meters. Now, what this all means for the number of shots it takes to kill in the maximum damage range, so within that 40 meters or so, both of these actually take the same number of shots to kill against a fully plated enemy at 9. So even though the Fara is dealing a bit more damage, it doesn't change the number of shots to kill against a fully plated enemy. However, against 2 armor plates as well as 1 armor plate, you will gain an advantage here with the Fara 83. As for the next thing I wanted to have a look at, this is our time to kill at both ranges, both up close as well as at a distance. So there's our base damage values again. And then taking a look at our rate of fire, this is 800 rounds per minute for both of these guns. And what this means to our 3-plate time to kill is up close, since they both kill in the same number of shots, and they have the same fire rates, they have the same time to kill at 600 milliseconds. However, once you get beyond the maximum damage range, the M4A1 drops off to a 12-shot kill against 3 armor plates, so our time to kill potential is 825 milliseconds, whereas with the Fara 83, it only drops off to a 10-shot kill at longer ranges, and therefore our time to kill potential is still great at 675 milliseconds. So if you are using this at range, the Fara 83 has a very clear time to kill advantage over the M4. And to make matters even worse for the M4, let's have a look at our recoil. And when we look at the M4's recoil, this is actually very solid. It kicks mainly straight upward to begin with, and then it starts to curve a bit to the right. But overall, this is a very controllable recoil pattern, and I would generally consider this to be quite accurate. Until the Fara 83 enters the picture with the same attachment combination, and as you can see here, there is so little recoil with the Fara 83. It kicks basically straight up with a very slight lean to the left, but you can see the overall magnitude and the bullet spacing is much lower than the M4A1, and the Fara 83 is just objectively better than the M4A1 when it comes to recoil by a very noticeable margin. While they're both considered accurate guns, the Fara 83 is in its own league when compared to the M4. Now, another really important stat for longer range builds is going to be bullet velocity, and our base bullet velocity is actually better with the M4A1 at 720 meters per second, whereas the Fara 83 has a 600 meter per second base bullet velocity. However, when looking at our potential bullet velocity when using the GRU or monolithic suppressor, as well as their longest barrel, the M4 gets a bullet velocity of around 1250 meters per second, whereas the Fara is just barely behind at about 1200 meters per second. Once you start to get up into this range, that 50 meters per second difference is hardly noticeable at all, and therefore, effectively speaking, they've got pretty much the same bullet velocity potential, and they're going to be just as effective as each other at longer ranges. So while there is a slight difference, I would consider this to be essentially a tie here. But finally, for this comparison, let's have a look at some of the handling and movement stats. For our aim down sight time with the setup that I've shared with you guys, this is where the M4 finally has a noticeable advantage over the Fara 83. Our aim down sight time is 284 milliseconds with the M4 with that setup, whereas with the Fara 83, it's noticeably slower at 500 milliseconds. So the M4 is definitely a little bit faster and snappier than the Fara 83. However, when we look at our sprint out times with, again, this same setup, they're equal at 267 milliseconds. And then finally, when it comes to movement speed, for the M4A1, this is 4.34 meters per second, whereas the Fara 83 is quite noticeably faster at 4.77 meters per second. So overall, when looking at this comparison, these guns are actually fairly similar in a lot of ways. However, the only real noticeable advantage that the M4A1 will have over the Fara 83 is its aim down sight time. In every other area that counts at least, the Fara 83 is either significantly better or basically exactly the same. And I think this is a great example of an issue that I've been seeing pop up quite a bit within Warzone, and that is, after all of the buffs the Cold War guns have been getting over time and all of the changes they've been seeing, most of them have just become better versions of the Modern Warfare weapons. And this essentially means there's not much reason to use any Modern Warfare weapons compared to their Cold War counterparts. And while this is very likely intentional, at least to some degree, in order to encourage people to buy the new bundles for the Cold War weapons that they keep bringing out, whereas they're not so much bringing out bundles for Modern Warfare weapons, and they also want to encourage sales of the base game of Cold War so that people can more efficiently level up Cold War weapons. I get what they're doing here, I understand that, but it's just a little bit unfortunate that there's such a large discrepancy between these two guns in particular, when I feel a lot more could be done to keep these in balance, and more so give you a choice between one or the other, and each could have their own pros and cons. As it is right now, comparing these two guns together, I really don't see a reason to use the M4A1 over the Fara 83. Like, sure, you get a little bit of a snappier aim down sight time, but when we're talking about long-range situations, which are where these guns are primarily going to be used, that aim down sight time isn't nearly as important as recoil, for instance, and that's where the Fara 83 has a massive advantage over the M4. So yeah, overall, in its current state, I would say the M4 is completely overshadowed by the Fara 83, and I do consider the Fara to be the best long-range assault rifle in the game currently. And really, I think the primary issue with this is the fact that it only drops off to a 10-shot kill at extremely long ranges compared to its 9-shot kill up close. This is just a really strange way to balance a long-range gun, especially a long-range gun that doesn't require upper torso shots to get maximum damage. And therefore, even though they've already touched the recoil a little bit recently, I do feel the damage at range is just a little bit too good on the Fara in its current state, and a reduction to that, in my opinion, would open up the long-range meta quite nicely. But that is just my opinion. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what did you guys think about this comparison? What do you think about the discrepancy between the Fara 83 and the M4A1? And also, how that trend tends to keep popping up when you compare a Cold War weapon to its closest Modern Warfare counterpart. Do you think this is fine as it is, like the M4 already had its day back when Modern Warfare was the main game, and now it's the Cold War weapon's turn? Or do you think there should be better balance between the two, where maybe they could give some more pros to the M4A1 to give it a little bit of an advantage over the Fara 83, at least in some situations? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.